Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Rachel Bettis. I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're also welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on June 13th with Catherine Grant, and it will be on English research, how you can use the General Register Office and how that site can help you. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner on exploring the MyHeritage DNA tools. Before we begin, here's a little bit about James. James has over 40 years of experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog. He has served as family history volunteer for 18 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He's a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer, has 7 grandchildren, 34 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. We will now turn the time over to James.
Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone to another BYU Library Family History Center webinar. They're very regular almost every week. We just got a new schedule for the next, 52 weeks or something that we're going to do webinars. So I suppose we'll be around for a while. The webinars are recorded, as mentioned, and they are available on the BYU Library Family History Center website, and they are also available from the BYU Family History Library or Library Family History Center YouTube channel. And right now we're getting close to 1,000 videos on the YouTube channel. Probably the next week or two will be over 1,000. So it's there's a lot of information out there. Today we're going to be talking about exploring the MyHeritage DNA tools. One of the things that that's just sort of the status of what goes on in the greater genealogical community that includes the entire world is that there are 2 major players in the DNA family history or genealogy DNA world, and they are Ancestry and MyHeritage. The reason for that I'll explain as we go along, but I can, basically I'll just repeat this a couple of times because it makes it's quite an important thing to know. It doesn't, because you can take DNA from lots of different places, the problem with it, if you're using it for genealogical purposes, is you also need to have a family tree. And in addition to that, there needs to be enough people and users on the website to make it worth your while. Because if you're looking for matches, the more people that are on the website, the more that it's possible that you'll find. And in this case, there are only 2 big ones, and that's MyHeritage and Ancestry. And what we recommend is you do both. In the case of MyHeritage, if you do an Ancestry DNA test, you can also upload the results from that DNA test to MyHeritage, and then you have even more exposure to people and possible matches. So I'm going to mention a lot about this in the details. It's supposed to be it as we go along, but right now we'll just get right into talking about some of the things that we're talking about. This is just kind of the introduction to MyHeritage. They have about just over 20 billion historical records. The large genealogy websites like Family Search and Find My Past and MyHeritage and Ancestry and a few more all kind of claim a number of records, and they're all in the billions. And the problem is that none of those people count the records the same way. So actually, it just means there's a lot of records and a lot of possibility of finding information about your family with all of these different websites. There's also 8.2 million people in the DNA database. And it's important to look at where these people are that have already taken the DNA test that you're going to be expecting to match up with. The important thing to realize here is that is where the people have. Family Search does not have a DNA test or capability or anything about DNA on their website except some instructions about how to use it. But Ancestry both and MyHeritage have huge numbers of people. The Ancestry people are primarily, if you think in terms of English speaking, it means they come from the Great Britain, former colonies, and the United States, and a few countries, other countries. But in the main, that's their main audience, you might say, or consumer base. And MyHeritage, on the other hand, is primarily in Europe and in Eastern Europe, and has people in every single country of the world. So this is, there's a difference here. And that's why I would suggest that you may want both of the DNA tests. Also, MyHeritage supports 42 different languages. That means everything you put into MyHeritage is available to people in those 42 different languages. So it's very important if you happen to want to know if you're related to people in a country where they don't speak your language. And I need to make this understood at the very beginning, because the presentation assumes that you have or are based on about to take or have taken a MyHeritage DNA test, or that you've uploaded raw data from another company. Because what I'll talk about are the features that are on the MyHeritage website. So we're not going to be getting into what's on Ancestry or what's available on some of the other websites out there. And I can't emphasize enough that taking a DNA test is only the beginning. That's only the bare possibility. And the fact that what happens when you get a DNA test from either, I'm just going to focus on MyHeritage. When you get a DNA test from MyHeritage, what you basically are going to do is find a lot of matches. Now, if the key here is you have to have a family tree. If you do a DNA test on MyHeritage or Ancestry and then don't do anything to put your ancestors into the family tree, you may find you have a match with somebody, and if it says they don't have a tree, there's absolutely no way other than trying to contact that person directly, which may be very difficult, other to know how you're related to that person. So what the key here is the people who you match to, and you need to have a family tree with all the information you know about your ancestor. And then what will happen is the DNA test will give you a way to, as I'll explain, it'll give you a way to find out who's the common ancestor is and how you're related to these people. And then it can be turned around, obviously, is one of the points of having a DNA test, is that you can use the information in the DNA test to identify some of the people that you can't find or you don't know who they are. And it may be that a match with DNA will give you an insight or actually the identity of a person that is in your family tree. What I mean by this is, and it's one of the realities of taking a DNA test and then being involved in these either one of these two huge DNA repository family tree websites, is that you may find things that are rather uncomfortable. In other words, it's not uncommon to find relatives that you didn't know existed. In the way that you may find out that your parents aren't really your parents, and you have some other parents out there who are your biological parents. Or you could find out that someone in your family is adopted, or someone in your family was not adopted and should have been, or whatever. And these are stories that just run kind of in the background constantly from the large DNA companies, because they like to have people find their lost relatives and ancestors. So basically what's there is the tiny risk there is that your life may be pretty much turned upside down by the findings in the DNA. But if you've done your genealogy and you've done a family tree and you've worked on the people, then you probably already know that there's some relatives that you're not quite sure about. So if you don't have a family tree, the actual thing is that it just says, and I'm repeating this a little bit, that you cannot be matched to a common ancestor. There's nothing they're going to tell you of information about your family that is, let's say, given to you without you doing some effort. So basically, it's a question of the more information you have, the more people you have worked through and verified it to be in your family tree, the more possibilities you have for DNA matches. And you'll see here from my numbers here that I'm in the tens of thousands of DNA matches. And it's, there's a lot of people there. And because there are issues and questions in my relatives that are now very much going to be very much let's say obvious to they're going to help you a lot in understanding that the genealogy paper, let's call it the paper genealogy, that the research that you've done can be validated. So if you're taking a DNA test and you're finding all these people are related to you by DNA, that's confirming the fact that the research that you've done for whatever time you've been involved in doing research has a scientific and actual physical way of demonstrating that what you've done is correct. Obviously, if you don't have any matches, then there's a question, because either that means that nobody's taken the DNA test on that particular line, or the fact that they might not be related to you. That can happen if you find out that siblings in your family don't all have the same DNA test results. And I would urge you to put a lot of information in your family tree. The more you have out there and the more information is available. What happens in many cases is people feel like they're breaching somebody's privacy when they put information in a family tree. Well, first of all, none of the larger websites will allow you to see someone else's living family or the other living people. Now, on DNA matching, you're being matched to living people. But the people that are there can make a decision as if they want to have their DNA results private or in public. The whole purpose of having a DNA test and of doing genealogy is to get to know your relatives. And if you do this in privacy and don't let anybody look at it and don't let anybody get into it to see what it is, and don't make your information available to others, you've kind of defeated the whole purpose of doing genealogy. So right now it's basically a situation where everything needs to be out there that can be. And that does not mean you put anything out there that's for living people other than the DNA test. And then there are some strict restrictions on how that works. Once you have, now you're in the program. Now you've done your DNA test, you've gotten your results, and the question, I guess, that comes up is what's next? I've answered that a little bit, and that is start working on your family tree and putting the information that you know about your family into a family tree. And then once you do that, you'll begin to come up with matches. And they'll also start to calculate immediately the larger companies, Ancestry and MyHeritage. And last time I'm going to mention that is that MyHeritage will calculate your ethnicity estimate. And it's an estimate, it's a guess. It's based on statistical analysis of the results of DNA tests all over the world. And as time goes on, they get more specific and they get more information. So they may change a little bit when they start out. My ethnicity estimate has changed considerably and differs not significantly, but differs somewhat from that I've gotten from other companies. So basically, this is all my data. It's kind of public record information on MyHeritage. So there's no reason for any problem here from my personal um, whatever I think is a privacy issue. So we're here with mostly English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. Great Britain is the place, and I have 16.4% of other ethnicities. Now, this may be where you get a big surprise. This would be the second big surprise. The first one was you're related to people you didn't know you were related to, or you're not related to people that you thought you were related to. And in this case, you're finding out that you are related to lots of people that you didn't know existed. And that occurs with the fact that there are people move all over the world. And so you're not going to all be in the same place. But it shows here that predominantly the people I'm related to are in the United States. There's a significant number in UK, and then Denmark and Australia. Australia, I have two lines of family of my lines. Now, what happens is that in doing research over the years, I can look at this and I can say, yes, I know where all those people came from, and I can see them in my family tree, but there are significant differences here. As far as I know, I have not found anyone in my family tree from Sweden. I have never found anybody from New Zealand or from Norway. So when I'm getting down into those numbers, it's very possible that either the results are showing a relationship that is rather remote and not even in the range of what we've got in the family trees. But it may also be that there are people who were in the other countries who have moved to those countries. And so the DNA matches are from people who have moved around the world and been in other countries. That certainly was the case with Australia. And so it would be very possible that there's other countries out there that have the same possibility. And so here's what they're going to show you what it looks like when you put it on the map. And it's easy to see where these people are coming from. One thing you need to know about Norway, Sweden, and Denmark is they used to be the same country. At various times, Sweden and Denmark were the same country, and sometimes Sweden, Norway, and Denmark were the same country, and sometimes Denmark and Norway were the same country, meaning they had the same king or governmental organization. So that's not surprising. And the United Kingdom and stretching a little bit over into but Netherlands for me is not very surprising at all. That I'm related to a lot of people in the United States is obvious. The ones that are kind of different here are Italian and the West Asian. That's the kind of one over Italy and the one over the Middle Eastern countries and off over there to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So far as I have looked, I have not ever found any kind of genealogical research from the family tree standpoint of anybody in my family tree that was born in Italy or in that part of the world. So I'm a little bit surprised, but as I continue to do research, I actually have a very logical and very reasonable explanation for those two. And I'll talk about that in just a few minutes as I go along here. So once you have your ethnicity estimates, you will also have a list of DNA matches. Now I've hopefully modified these so that there's no names that appear other than surnames. And they are people that you're either directly related to or you have a cousin relationship, that they're descendants from one of your aunts or uncles or through your grandparents. So these are, this is, in my case, once as I mentioned, there's 17,000 of these DNA matches on MyHeritage. So how do we deal with this? Well, we deal with this in the same way we deal with a lot of information because genealogy creates is a progression. It's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, so forth. Basically, we're all of us are related to tens of thousands of people. And so the question is, how do we deal with it? And the answer is, we focus on those things that we are particularly interested in, and we kind of ignore the rest because there's no really way you can handle all of this information at once. And what you really need to do is consider what your goals and objectives are in having an interest in genealogy. If your interest is sort of like mine, which is very universal. In other words, I work on all the different lines, and I go back as far as I can on every line, and then I do descendancy research. So it's just something that I do, is doing all that. And for some people, it has religious basis, which it does for me too. So we're basically into something where there's literally no real end to the number of people that can be involved once you get started in looking at the issues. Now you'll see here, if you look at this closely, you'll see what they have is how many people appear in their family tree. So in the family tree with the first one up there, there was 148 people. With the family tree with the second one is 295 people, and then the third one down there only has one person. Now it would be very difficult to figure out who he was if I didn't happen to know a first cousin. It's possible that I could identify all my first cousins, but if they're all living, that may not be possible, and especially if they're people that I don't really have any contact with and don't know anything about. So now you can review your matches and how much of that is there. Here's where you get into a little bit of jargon. The jargon here is the number that's in this. It's a percentage plus there's another number that's got a cm after it. That's centimorgan, and a centimorgan is a measure of the percentage of DNA that matches. It's a little more complicated, a lot more complicated than that. But the main thing you need to know about centimorgan, without getting into the complications of all the jargon and everything of DNA, is that the higher the number is, the more likely it is that you are related. And so if in this case, the program, because that 3,508 centimorgan level gives the probability of 100% that I'm related to this person who's my son. So here's kind of the real complete explanation of the centimorgan. It's a unit of measurement that expresses the distance on, if you think of chromosomes as being like long strands of genes, of little markers, and each of those has got like a code. And so what the centimorgan does is it takes it creates, it's a calculation that is equal to what's a 1% chance that two of these markers on the chromosome on the long strands will separate from each other during meiosis. And when the person is married, the person is born, and the egg and sperm cells form the person. So roughly into that, it's a way of telling how closely those people are related by percentage basis. One of the things that's very universal is that human beings inherit 50% of their DNA from their father and 50% from their mother. very close to 50%. It's possible that there could be slight one way or the other, but it's 50% is what you get. And so as you go down, then you get only so if your grandparents, you're only getting 25% of your grandparents, and of your great grandparents, you're getting 12.5%, and so forth. And so basically there's a limit to what the DNA can predict. And in most, kind of from a rule of thumb with DNA, we're talking about going back 6 generations will take you back to about the limit of some kinds of DNA. Now there's other DNA testing that's done, that's not the same ones as are done with MyHeritage. And that is that they test your male line and your female line. And those lines can be tested and taken back many, many generations. And that's, but they're very specialized. And again, if you haven't done the genealogy, don't have a family tree that goes back and creates a situation where you're asking questions that far back in your genealogy, then it's not going to really do you any much good to get one of those tests, because it will just show you kind of randomly some people you may be related to, but you can't tell because you don't have any way of looking at your ancestors. So there really is a direct relationship between having the research genealogy as well as the DNA test. They go hand in hand. And the DNA test becomes a tool for doing the genealogical work because it may suggest things that aren't otherwise known. But what we start here with MyHeritage, some of those things that you've already seen are extremely helpful for MyHeritage, but here is one that's very helpful. When you have this and they give you the amount of your centimorgan between you and a person, you can then go to that and figure out between those numbers that what it is that you need to know. And then it will figure out exactly who what the percentages are. So all of the calculations and the analysis of the centimorgans is kind of contained in this very, very straightforward and very quite simple app that goes along with MyHeritage. So when you put in your centimorgan value, and there's a way to do this, and there are abundant instructions on the MyHeritage website, on their education site, and now on their wiki site about how this works, and there are webinars and videos and all sorts of things specifically about the CMN, the centimorgan explainers. So when you put the number in and it puts your age and your match's age, then it will show you the percentage probability of how you're related to that person. So here's your centimorgan, and then if you put in the number there, 5,008 or 3,508, you'll notice there's no comma and there's no period and there's no extra numbers. It's just a raw number that is important in the CMN's centimorgan explainer. So that's the number that is put into the program, and without a comma. So it gets a little bit, when you get working with it, you'll find out that you don't get anything, and then you'll find out you've got to be pretty strict at how you put that in. So if we show that, then we have all of that information, and you have a probability of who that person is. Now, one thing that's happening is as MyHeritage is developing their worldwide very, very extensive outreach with both DNA and with additional records and support for genealogy, they are getting in more and more specific about ethnicities. And one thing you can do here on this particular part of the program is go to a country, and it will then tell you what the predominant ethnicities are in the country now. And ethnicities are different than races, and ethnicities are different than anything else. A race, there's you may not be, it may be surprised, but there's almost no way to tell a person's race from DNA. DNA is not is when it's shared, it's not. But ethnicities do have some DNA. That's people who have passed on certain characteristics through the different parts of the world. And so the ethnicities charts are helpful because they get more and more specific over time. And I'm going to talk about, as I go through this, an ethnicity that I have some potential ancestors that I'm looking for to see if I have DNA tests that would support the fact that I think that I know what ethnicity they were. So here's what you'll find out if you look at the countries individually. You'll find out that in England, if you have English ancestors, it's very possible, in addition, you have Scandinavian, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, and North and West European and Iberian. Iberian is Spain. It's very possible that all of that is part of your heritage. One of the things that people don't really focus on a lot of times when they're doing genealogy, and they'd like to trace their line back to some royalty, and you need to understand, if you know anything about the royalty in Europe, is that the royalty in Europe are all related. Not maybe every one of them, because they sometimes marry out of their royal lines, but generally speaking, there's kind of a way. So you can very much count on the fact that you're going to have some overlap and some extraneous, because there's going to be much mixture between the times when all these people got together at various times. And the fact that England is a mixed country. They've had all of these people have tried at one time or another. The people from Europe and the French took over the country, and that brings in all the Western European ethnicities, and the Vikings and the Norwegians, and people came down and once conquered. And now you're going to think of how my ethnicity shows that I have blood from Italy. And we'll see about that, but it's simple. The Roman Empire extended to England. Your relationship on a DNA test is represented by 23. You have 23 chromosomes, and when they do diagrams, they put colored sections indicating the shared segments in between two people. And what here you can do is do what's called, this is another app, and it's called the Chromosome Browser. And you can put in up to 6 people and just enter them and click, and it take them out of your family tree. And then it'll show you their segments, and you can see where you're matched, because those colors will show up on top of each other. So this is it's showing just my segments. And then if I have distant relatives and things, or these are close relatives. So if it's distant relatives, there's a blue one and there's a red one, and that's about all that we have in common. If they're close relatives, you'll see that with at least 2 centimorgans of value, that there are, it's very obvious that these people are all these people are my close relatives. So when you look at that, some are more close than others as we go down the list. I think you can do 8. I'm sorry, I forgot there were 8 here. Um, so there is a article, there are articles, and I mentioned this a moment ago. That is, MyHeritage has what's called their education.myheritage.com website. And that's a knowledge base of articles and videos that will that'll tell you how all of this works in very, very much detail. So if you get kind of, I don't understand what I just said, uh, and you don't, I mean, that you don't understand what I just said, and maybe I don't either understand it, but basically you can go through and take one of these and find all the information you need to explain in detail how all of these work and how you can benefit from them over time. And I would have to say that you do have to spend a lot of time if you want to get into the really detailed part of it. So why would you do that? Well, there are some benefits of working into it if you have, let's say you have a very great difficulty because you have immigrants, you came from someplace. I'm just one example. You have immigrants in your family who came from someplace and you have no idea where they came from. Specifically, you may know they came from Europe or they may come from a country that no longer exists. But the problem is you don't know anything about that person. And so it would be, it's very important that if you do a DNA test, that you begin to look at, and it's nice to have MyHeritage because they spread so much. They have such a wide reach that you can get that information and find people perhaps on a family tree that you had no idea were relatives, and find out where they lived. And in addition to this, when you have your close relatives, then that can be a way of finding information about people that if you don't have any contact with your family, or that you were adopted and you're looking for your birth parents or your birth relatives. This is how it's done. This is how you find out those whose people are. Now, granted, you have to understand that you're not going to find someone who hasn't taken a DNA test. So that rules out a lot of people. And you're not going to find somebody on MyHeritage unless they've taken a MyHeritage test. So that's why it's sometimes if you're really looking for a very close relative and like your parents or a sibling, then that you should take as many tests as you can afford. And if there are matches, perhaps that would be able to do it. And now MyHeritage will let you upload a number of the other companies' tests. So here you will have a very mature family tree structure and a lot of records to help you. So here we are back to the knowledge base, which is a very important thing. Now, one of the things that we are attempting to do with a DNA test is to determine a common ancestor. So you have all these people, and identifying a common ancestor then provides you with a greater base of people in order to move back in time. If you get enough people working and you have enough people that you know are relatives, then it makes it a lot easier to go back on each generation. Because not easy at all, I shouldn't say that word, but it makes it so that you can move backward in time and have a better basis for how you're working and understanding it. Now, what that means is that when you have a lot of people that you find are related, then you can go through the process of building a chart where how your people are all related. These are called the clusters. So if you can just figure out how you're related to all these people and so forth, well, rather than go through that process very, I would say, quite painful process. What happens in MyHeritage is if you have enough tests and enough people and enough ancestors in your family tree, that MyHeritage will then start to build those clusters for you. So as you're looking at this chart, it's got the names of some of the people who match across the top and the names of the same people down the side. And it's who everybody else, the markers tell who each person has relationship to. And so the more closer those people are to each other, the more color or the more compact the relationships are become. And when it's generated from your DNA, and this does this whole thing automatically, you don't have to worry about finding the names or anything else. It'll just fill this up and come out with the details. So what'll happen there is that it will start calculating, and eventually, after a few minutes, you'll see that it's separated itself out into a very neat pattern of different colored squares. And in each of those squares, all of those people have a common ancestor. And as you go down, the possibility of finding the person becomes more and more remote. But if you have family trees with a number of those people, that's fairly easy to come up with a common ancestor. But MyHeritage has also done that work for you, and it comes out in a different part of it, and that's called the theory of family relativity. So once you get a sufficient amount of information into the family tree, then MyHeritage will come back and suggest these theory of family relativity issues to you. So what you have here is you have me, and then there's another relative over there that I've cut off because they're still a living person. And so I've tried, in this case, to block out any people who might be alive in this presentation other than myself. And in this case, it shows me going back to my great-grandfather. And then over on the right-hand side, it shows the descendancy chart through people who are calculated and through DNA calculated to be related to me on this line. So now it's shown me that all of the people who are descendants in that family, and those people, those other people, are how we're related. We're both have this Henry Martin and Eliza Ellen Parkinson and Henry Martin Tanner as their great grandparents or great great grandparents. So this is something that is being calculated kind of constantly as more information. So the more you get involved in putting people in your family tree, and in well, you have to take a DNA test, obviously. Then this is just something that MyHeritage calculates from time to time. And then as you get into your DNA matches, you'll see that it'll mention that you have a theory of relativity. Occasionally, if you want to get email from the company, they will send you an email notice saying they've created or been able to calculate another theory of family relativity. And the interesting thing about this is that they do it in 5 different ways. So you have path 1, path 2, path 3, path 4, and path 5. So it's possible that they'll show you 5 different ways how that works. And so you may be finding relatives that you didn't know you had. And the way I look at it, and what I mentioned a while ago, is that this begins to validate the way that you've done your research. If you find out that this doesn't work, then you may not have the correct people in your family tree. Because the DNA is going to be the thing that the scientific basis that shows the actual relationships, rather than just what you think about the law. This and kind of in this part, there's another issue, and I talked about ethnicities and the cultural groups. People in the United States are sometimes have a family tradition that they're descendants from a Native American, usually what they call an Indian princess or something like that. Take a DNA test and see if you have any Native American relatives. That's a simple way to determine that. And it's the same way with any other ethnicity. And it's a good idea that it will either turn out to confirm your family tradition, or you may still have some leeway to find out if you really want to find out, to do more research and see if that would happen to show that you're related. So I'm kind of back to here to what we're talking about with these ethnicities that I have. And I mentioned a little bit about the Italian. Now, the Italian ethnicity, all of these two floater things out here are telling me, saying that I have genetic relationships with people who are in Italy and also in those countries that are in the yellow over there on the right-hand side. And I just emphasize I'm not aware of all the research I've done for the last 42 plus years of any research that would show that I was related to somebody from Italy or from that area of the country, of the world. So who were these people? Well, I mentioned what it was for the Italians, and that was simple, because if you take enough research and you do enough of your own research on your family tree, those sort of looking like anomalies may not turn out to be anomalies. Of course, because the Romans were in Britain from AD 43 to 410 for 367 years. So the fact that some DNA from the Romans who were from Italy, that part of the Roman Empire, happened to make it into England is not really a surprise. So having an ethnicity, a possible ethnicity match with the Romans is entirely possible. And then the question is, what about the Middle Eastern one? Well, I have two ancestors. I have one ancestor line, and the two women who married one of my great grandfathers are included in the Gypsy Surname Index of Great Britain. And so basically, if we go to that, we learn a little bit about who those people are. The name Gypsy is inappropriate. It's not what they're called. They are the Roma, and they're an ethnic group of people who originated in the Punjab region of northern India about 250 BC. And they have spread all over Europe. And it is very, very possible that if you have someone has married into and has genetic connection to somebody who's a Roma. And now we don't know for sure. We did get an indication. The only indication we have is this Middle Eastern possibility that stretches over into the northern India area. And so we're looking for that. But it's still an interesting question as to whether or not these people were gypsies. There's some characteristics about the individuals, the two ladies, the two grandmothers, my grandmother and her sister, who were, they kind of seem to be gypsies, so or Roma. So we'll see if that's supported by further research. And understand this, that this is just the beginning. There's questions that can be resolved specifically. One specific question that is resolved from my standpoint was that I had a great-grandfather. His name was Marinus Christensen. And and in his family, he had two older sisters who were 16 and 18 years older, and there were no other children in the family, and his parents, and they were in Denmark. And the rumor, the tradition in the family was that this Marinus was adopted. Now, one of the theories, of course, were that he was the son of one of the two daughters because they were of age that they could have been his parent, his mother, and then he would have been just part of the family. The other was that he was truly adopted and really wasn't a Christensen in that particular family. Now, Christensen is a very common name in Denmark, so his name might have been Christensen even after he was adopted. But there was no way to really tell that, and no suspect. So, but one of my daughters, who is a professional level or professional genealogist in the true word, basically went through and looked through all the records in the parish where he lived in Denmark, and found a person who was born with the same name, Marinus, but was not was born out of wedlock, and the parents were there, but we had no way of knowing if that person, Marinus, would have been the same person as the one that was in the Christensen family. So what happened is we had all that information in here with the DNA tests and everything in here in MyHeritage. And it found, and with that theory of family relativity, what happened is that the father that my daughter had discovered through the research showed up, his descendant showed up as being our relatives. Other children that he had and other family lines down were showing up as DNA matches, whereas none of the people from that line were showing up in the line from the daughters or from Marinus's adopted parents. And so the DNA test showed that Marinus was adopted, and actually through the research that my daughter had done, basically showed us who the two parents were, and there were a lot of, and it's in Denmark. There was a lot of not just cultural pressure, but church and legal pressure to have the fathers when their children are born out of wedlock were almost always identified. So it made it so that we know, and now we have a whole new line of people to register, research, and that solves that mystery of who that person was and whether he was adopted. So thanks for watching. I know that there's a lot of things that are not very well explained or in detail, but I hope that you'll find. I know that you'll find, if you look on our website, the BYU website, that we have a lot of information on DNA. And I mentioned more than once the knowledge base that MyHeritage has with their education.myheritage.com website. That is a tremendous help also in explaining the specific programs that are here on the website. Okay. Doesn't look like anybody's put any questions in. If anybody has a question, I've got a couple of things. Okay, well, thank you for coming, and we'll go stop sharing here. It's back to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which will be next week on June 13th with Catherine Grant on English research, how the General Register Office site can help you. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week, and you can view that on our YouTube channel or our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thanks and have a wonderful week.